All right.
Ready?
Yeah.
Hello, world. Zero here. Welcome to Crypto Mondays, St. Louis, first evening. I'm here tonight with Cory Feco, co-CEO of Crypto World St. Louis. I believe, is this the first brick and mortar crypto establishment in the U.S.? Or one of the earliest.
Yeah, first of its kind.
Awesome. And tonight we're going to be talking a little bit. We're going to kick everything off. First off, thank you for the space tonight. I appreciate that. You know, it's wonderful to see you guys doing all this community engagement. And I would love to hear more about what specifically Crypto World's got going on in the future.
Oh, for sure. Well, ultimately, in order to get into the future, I think we need to go briefly into the past. So some number of years ago, Crypto World started during the hype in 2020 of crypto mania, if you will, when people had a lot of questions around mining, setting up wallets. They didn't have access to set up mining gear, hardware, things like that. And it became pretty obvious that a space like this was needed. Well, through the up and down cycles, which anybody who's been in the crypto space long enough, you're going to see a number of up and down cycles.
True.
And so this was bound to happen. Granted, we didn't quite expect the whole FTX and Gemini and all that kind of stuff. That's obviously a story for another day. But point being is what we realized is that whenever we weren't getting 10x, 20x, 30x returns in the crypto market, that people weren't coming into the space as much anymore. And that really led to the epiphany that people weren't really fully understanding the impact of the technology or the potential impacts of the technology. And there were more there because they saw it as a get-rich-quick opportunity, which, you know, is what it is, human nature. But we really started to ask ourselves, okay, do we believe that this technology matters? Do we believe that the Bitcoin infrastructure matters? Do we believe that blockchain technology matters? Do we think that we can solve real-world problems leveraging these tools? And if so, like, what is the separation between us having this understanding and the lack of that understanding into the general environment? So let me start with a question for you, actually. Is there something on your side in the blockchain world that's a passion project of yours to solve any kind of real-world problem?
I mean, yeah, I have a couple of projects. I think the most poignant one involving a real-world problem would be I'm currently working on a rental equity token.
Okay.
So I'm talking to investors in the real estate space, and I'm modeling out a concept where you will be able to get an online digital ID through a decentralized system. And basically, every dollar you spend in rent, you'll get a token back that is good towards the purchase of a single-family residency at some point in the future. And it's in no way attached to ever really fluctuate. The value of this specific token is the exchange rates in receiving it for rent and then giving it back for the purchase of the home. So basically, every dollar you spend in rent, you'll earn, say, 0.8 of these equity tokens. And you can't do anything with them except trade them back towards the purchase of a home at 1-to-1 for, say, the US dollar. And we'll say that's a peg. So you capture 20% as a company. Through the application of a new type of artificial intelligence, this can be done profitably in a way that can be decentralized in a DAO structure, so that basically, as opposed to traditional mortgages to acquire equity where you have a continuous payment system of multiple decades, you can like sign up with your DID, rent from us for a year, go do something else, come back, and you still have those tokens, and they'll still be good towards the purchase of a property later. That's sort of the really high level concept that I'm working with as far as like the rental equity token. And I feel like that's like use cases involving extant structure is going to be the key to mass adoption in the future, I feel. We have to prove as an industry that we are capable of being more than just like line go up, more than just like a currency.
So what might you say to someone who heard all of that and went, I understand about 5% of it. It sounded nice. Why do you need the blockchain for it?
Because of a few reasons involving sovereignty. Cryptography is security in a lot of ways. And what we see with extant infrastructure involving fundamental aspects of society is that centralized structures tend to have game theories that can lead to personal corruptions, especially when overlaid with regulatory systems and profit models. So like how in the housing model right now we see where we have centralized mortgage brokers and entities like that, it becomes very difficult for first-time homeowners to be able to acquire property. And I posit that a lot of that is because of centralized systems, leading to a game theory for investors and employees towards exploitative practices, where any sort of blockchain-based decentralized system is going to allow for a layer of self-sovereignty that changes the game theory towards the accomplishment of the goal of the system.
So in your explanation, I would say that's exactly why we felt we had to pivot our model. Because while that was a perfectly wonderful explanation, it required a lot of layers of foundational understanding and a lot of simultaneous concepts being placed in your mind, both the understanding of centralized versus decentralized systems, sovereignty, the ability, you mentioned digital identification, you mentioned the ability to accrue an asset and it being able to be still there and stored even if you're no longer inside of the exchange of value in that system. And there's so many different layers that you put on there, which didn't diminish the value or the impact of the technology, but it made it very hard for most people to understand. And this isn't unique to you, it's unique to all of us in the emerging technology space. You have these advanced technologies, they can do a lot of really wonderful things. But people, in order to understand how to solve real world problems in the average person's life, it requires a certain level of learning curve. And most people don't know what they need if they don't know they need it.
True.
So the crypto world really been grappling with that, is how do we get people into encountering these like real world concepts in a way where they can clearly understand, okay, hey, I woke up this morning, I walked outside, I saw a homeless person on the street. I feel like that's an issue I want to address, and there's a way to address it, or at least to try to address it in some capacity using advanced technologies, blockchain, AI, etc. Well, we first need to get those people to encounter the idea that these problems can be solved. But if they have no interest in coming into the space because there isn't something to engage them, to entertain them, then we never get the opportunity for them to have that aha moment where they understand that, oh, wait a second, I didn't realize this, but this problem that I've been dealing with, for instance, I keep my bank account or my cousin's bank account keeps going negative and they get a bunch of overdrafts 2 days before their paycheck comes in because they get paid every 2 weeks. If they got paid every day, because you could do that automatically through a blockchain system, then they wouldn't go negative in their bank account, and the $6 billion or however much it is in overdraft fees that banks accrue would become largely, you'd be tackling that problem, at least for people that are struggling paycheck to paycheck. So in that way, they begin to understand, oh gosh, this is something I understand. Now, do I want to engage with it further? Well, if the impact is great enough, the problem is great enough, they're more likely to do that. And so we realized that during the point where people lost the interest because it was all about get rich quick schemes, line go up. Now we needed to create a space that drew everybody in because it's a fun place to be, because it was a place where they could connect with others, they could build community, there'd be esports, there'd be entertainment events. And if we had this space, then we can lace into it all the subconscious possibilities for impact, and then support them by making sure that the tools are there, the investors are there if they start up a business, the equipment that is there if they need the resources to operate their own startup off of. If they want to support other organizations, they can buy their products or services there. And so in this way, it allows the impact that these advanced technologies promise to be introduced into the world. Because otherwise we run this problem where no matter how great any of this or all of this is, if the average person doesn't encounter it, then it's still going to be relegated to the top 0.1% who can intellectually understand the concepts and then implement them, or who at least have the capital to invest in it and make enough of a decision to be able to invest in it. And everyone else is going to get set to the sidelines, and the wealth gap is going to get ever and ever greater, which is what's been happening over the course of the last however many decades since advanced technologies have been entering the space. Those who know how to use them inside their businesses succeed. Those who know how to invest in these types of businesses, they succeed. Those who even leverage them on an individual level, they succeed. But everybody else who's just too far beyond the comprehension gap, they get left further and further and further and further behind.
Yeah.
And so we had to solve the problem by creating a space that actually people wanted to come into. And that's what we're doing.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant, and it's good societal fundamentals too. Like it's very much akin to like the typical like what you'd hear of like the community centers, you know, and that's really the core to any, I think, any movement or philosophy, is to be able to engage in like the ground root, you know, like that's part of Crypto Mondays and everything, is the core philosophy, like the whole WAGMI philosophy, you know. And I have to say, I've lived in the area for years. I never bothered trying to like reach out locally. I travel a lot for different events, and I don't know why, but I never did. And when I decided to do this, I reached out, and I literally, I think I just Googled like crypto St. Louis, and you guys came up and a bunch of ATMs, and I was like, well, what's this? Let me check this out. And I have to say, it's amazing to see that there's this like place in St. Louis that does this. I mean, I'm excited to see what comes out of it over the next few years. And I've been told that you guys have a big project that I might be lucky enough to hear about tonight. Is that right?
Well, yes. So to the point of what I was alluding to is that we realized that we had to create a space where not 100 people or 1,000 people, but 100,000 or 1,000,000 people in any given city would come to visit. Because only in that kind of exposure can we actually hope to realize the promise that is, you know, Web3, that is blockchain.
Sure.
If we don't, and we truly believe that if we don't succeed in bringing millions of people, the masses, in a meaningful way, not in just something they see on the news about money going up or scams, stealing money or whatever it is, but to actually understand in a really, truly meaningful way what is possible and for them to actually engage with it, then the promise of Web3 will die. And so we, correctly or incorrectly, feel like all of Web3 is on our shoulders. If we succeed, then we can show millions of people around the world every single year what it is that they can actually do to change the world that they live in a meaningful way, to create better impact to themselves, to their communities, to society at large, and maybe even solve some of these larger humanity-sized problems that we've been grappling with. Or if we can't bring in millions of people for meaningful impact, starting at the level where they understand, then it's going to be a lot of esoteric conversations amongst intellectuals about pontificating about what Web3 can or can't do, or how international settlement systems take 3 to 4 days, and like trusted third party intermediaries and so on and so forth. And none of that is relevant to the 99% of people who actually need to change their lives.
Yeah, it's about self-sovereignty and trying to free yourself from exploitative systems for like a lot of the people at the bottom. That's the brilliance of it, I think, and the concepts of decentralization that drew me to it at an early age.
Yeah. So in that way, it's like the question is how do you bring in 500,000 people in the inner city to the table to even get the exposure to that concept, and in a way that they understand? Mm-hmm. And how do you maintain their interest long enough for them to absorb enough information to actually act upon it?
Right.
This larger concept is actually, this larger problem is actually something that innovation centers all around the world have been dealing with. You know, like for instance, even here in St. Louis, you've got the Cortex Innovation Center. And if you walk in, and for a typical event, you might be lucky to see a couple dozen people. And you think about that, you go, wow, it feels nice to network, and you might be in the who's who, and you're talking to investors or talking to change makers or whatever it might be. But as far as real world impact to the 10, 15, 20, 30 blocks around that building, it's largely irrelevant. If anything, it's negative, because what happened is they spent so much money building out that infrastructure that they just made the property values for all the people that might have been there for years or decades, it increased them so much and made it to where they can no longer afford the rents in that area, didn't provide them real opportunities, at least in the way that they understood, and just displaced them. And so this is not a unique problem. It's a world scale problem.
Right.
Cities all around the world are trying to figure out, okay, how do we actually engage the community in a way where we can solve the wealth gap, where we can solve our crime issues, where we can solve the fact that people don't feel like they have a sense of ownership or power, where some people voices get heard and some people don't. Generational wealth gets stacked up in one direction or the other. You either, if you're born poor, you oftentimes will stay poor, and if you're born rich, you oftentimes will stay rich. And people can see this, and they are beginning not to believe in the American dream anymore. And quite frankly, I don't blame them. And so, and even beyond America, they're still trying to solve this problem, especially in cities where the populations are hollowing out, where there's large population flight, and they're trying to figure out how they can financially sustain themselves with ever increasing debt loads, both at a city, state, and federal, and actually, for that matter, other countries, international, their debt loads. They're trying to, how do you make more money with less resources, while also at the same time not leaving behind everybody else? If you're using the top 5% or top 1% or top 0.1% to drive the 2, 3, 4, 5 times economic growth, and then how do you do that sustainably?
Sure.
So, and obviously the more human systems you put in there, the more it gets aggregated in ways where it can be leveraged for corruption, and so on and so forth. And every city, I think by and large, wants to create a better situation. They don't want crony capitalism, I don't believe. I think that they're just doing the best they can with what they have. And they want to make these things work, but innovation centers, innovation districts around the world, they're not working. It's because they're not engaging the general public. And so it doesn't matter what blockchain technology can do or what AI can do or any of that kind of stuff if the general public isn't also involved in it.
Yeah, that's very fair. And I mean, that's a lot of the core concepts of decentralization and how like this technology, like one of the least talked about aspects of it is like the individual customization that we're able to see with large scale systems now because of the bottom up nature of it. So like community engagement, being able to like give people a facility or a place to like do that is absolutely critical, not just for like blockchain adoption, but for I think all aspects of like developing a healthy like culture and society. Mm-hmm. So is that, I guess you've elaborated on a lot of the whys and the way you guys want, like specifically like what is it that we can look forward to coming up from you guys?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, we realized this problem is a humanity-sized problem that is, if we are correct, the entirety of Web3 hinges upon our being successful or somebody else taking this baton, taking the concepts around this and implementing effectively, drawing the general public into the space. But in order to create these spaces, you need 100,000 square foot spaces plus.
Sure.
That reflect the needs, the desires, the culture of the local community, where people walk in and they're immersed with the most gorgeous technology that they've ever seen, walls that interact with them based off the NFTs that they have on their phone. So Gucci stores that you can like walk into and have digital representations based off of the NFTs that you have, or be able to vice versa, be able to get exclusive access to different events and opportunities and sales based off the way that you've interacted inside that community. The ability to interact with exhibits that show you how MasterCard is tracking from seed to table on the blockchain for some of the foods that you are eating. Sure. And so real world impact use cases where people can understand that, hey, look, the world doesn't have to keep getting worse. It can get better. You can create voting systems that are more fraud resistant. You can create economic systems that are less likely to deflate in value, and to the point of not allowing anybody to aggregate enough wealth to have real ownership in things, so on and so on and so forth. But they have to be immersed in these types of exhibits, and it's not a small endeavor. We expect, and for our first project, we expect to be raising quite a bit. And we only, imagine that it will grow as we move from city to city around the world based off the needs of that local community. But we understand that it's going to take no less than a 100,000 square foot building, and it has to be filled with all of the things that people want: esports, events. So if you're going to have Crypto World, or a Crypto World event, or a Crypto Mondays event, or for that matter, like a DeSci event or whatever it is, and you can choose anywhere in the world to have it, you'd have it in that building, and you'd be surrounded by all the best tools, all the greatest change makers, top investors, a advocate community of people buying products and services, and also just people that are excited and interested to do something on a Friday night with their kids,
Right.
walking into this space because there's something for them there.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're building out, because we believe that it's something that if we can solve this problem, starting with the local community here, but if we can solve this problem in a more meaningful way than the current innovation centers have, that this is something that there's hundreds of cities around the world, and for that matter, thousands if we did smaller scale versions of it towards the more regional communities.
I mean, yeah, we've seen in this space, like what we've seen with like Austin, for example, and the development there, what we've seen with Wyoming, like even some like Central Valley, California. But I mean, like in general, you'll see these areas where once technology is more kind of normalized, given access to through a saturation point, you start to see this drastic uptick in just a lot of different societal functions.
Oh, for sure. But to that point, so my last business that I exited from in 2020 was in Denver. And so I lived in Denver about half the time for about 7 years. And I had the opportunity to watch it transform. And it was fantastic. To see the level of innovation that's there, it's Austin level innovation, and it happened quickly. On the surface, this sounds fantastic, right? It didn't help the average people that were there.
Sure.
What happened, just like in Austin, is that innovation came in, capital came in. Well, capital comes in, then innovation comes in, and they built out a very beautiful city for people who already had money. And then the people in California and Texas who already had money started moving to Colorado. And same thing, everybody with money started moving into the area, buying up homes forever, more and more and more and more. Homes that were 120,000 are now 820,000, literally in just that period of time, the span of time since I was out there. And meanwhile, the people who live there, they're no better off.
Sure.
They're worse off.
Oh yeah.
They don't have the ability, they haven't increased their education. They haven't increased their employment capacity. They haven't learned any tools to leverage to create exponential returns on their time in their workplace. Their incomes haven't gone up by 7 times. What happened is that they got kicked out of the areas that many of them have lived in for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, generations. And some of them, and if you go drive down through Denver and a lot of cities now, like as the housing costs go up, the homelessness goes up, because where do the people go?
Yeah, that's the other side of the advancements, is the gentrification and the offsetting because of the disconnect between the local community and the people moving in the area.
Yes, which I believe is a function of the way that we're going about this. And if we can go about it differently, where whenever we set up one of these innovation districts, it's designed to reach out to the general public in a way where they can understand that this is a place for them. So it's something that's happening for them, not something that's happening to them. It looks good whenever cities get together and talk about like how they're innovating or making a better society or city or whatever, but really all they're doing is hollowing out and creating larger wealth gaps.
Sure.
If we can create it in this way, we can uplift them too. And I think the most important part, because you talked about fractionalized ownership whenever you're talking about your rental company, is we believe, if at all possible, we would like to provide the ability for the community to actually own a large percentage of that building. So it's appreciable value, and also to returns based off of the impact, because if it's your building and you own it, then you're going to treat it like you own it. And if you treat it like you own it, and that means that it's successful, then you should be able to reap the rewards of that success, even if it's only $50 or $100 or $1,500, whatever it is, that you're able to contribute to that.
Sure.
And if you need the liquidity, if you need the ability to get out of it because your car breaks down, because unfortunately the people at that income bracket, those are the kinds of things they have to think about, then blockchain allows you the liquidity, so long as there's a buyer on the other side and the market set up for it, for you to be able to sell the token of your percentage of ownership, get your car fixed, and then whenever you have the opportunity again, purchase more tokens or whatever it might be, or not.
Sure.
So whereas current existing real estate systems don't allow for that. So if we believe if the community owns it, it's designed for the community, their needs, their desires, their culture, the things that they love, it represents them and their art taste and the things that make them uniquely St. Louis or New Orleans or whatever it might be. And they can walk into this space and feel welcomed, and there's always something for them to do, and they want to be there every day, every week, not because they're just trying to see some way to make money or, because they're trying to solve a problem, but because they want something to do, and then they can be into the sauce, if you will,
Sure.
of solving problems and opportunity, then we're going to have a very different societal structure
Absolutely.
than we do now.
Yeah, no, that's very valid. I mean, we're at a point where we're losing so much just in like the human capacity because of societal differences at this point. Such a percentage of the world is focused on basic survival still, and that's difficult.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, centralized systems don't scale globally, in my opinion, and we see a lot of struggles and a lot of problems involving economic inequality that come from just the nature of, game theory dictating corruption in most centralized economic models because of the knowledge like you're talking about. Those that know will exploit when they can. And that's a big problem. But I have to say it's fascinating, the concept of building community engagement centers like in different cities to actually help facilitate blockchain awareness, concepts of like self-sovereignty, global decentralization, and things like that. It's obviously something I'm super passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
So where are you guys at on your path to realizing that this space is pretty cool? I'm a big fan of this. What I am curious about is where are you guys going next at this point?
Yeah. Now
what's step one to that?
Yeah, so we are a number of steps into it.
Mm-hmm.
So because of SEC regulation, there I can't actually fully communicate where we're at, but I would say that we are not far from being able to communicate more to the general public. And if someone is interested in what we're doing, if they're interested in the why, and they want to support the cause, maybe share the word, or more importantly, help us on some of the finance acquisition and or real estate development side of things. We've got a fantastic team of A players. There's dozens of people that are A+, world class, best in class, like in the world, that are surrounding this project at different levels, from team members to advisors to partners to contractors, so on and so forth. And to that point, if we're always looking for more people that can help us to ensure that this comes to reality, because at the end of the day, ideas don't mean anything. They don't, not without execution.
That's fair.
And so we know that in order to make something reality, you need the resources, which is human capital, and of course, the stored energy that is money. And if you put those two things together behind a good idea or a meaningful idea, then you're far more likely to succeed. So I would say that that's the point where we're at, as far as if any of this piques your interest. If you are watching this right now and you go, you know what, that is a problem. I try to have discussions with my friends or my family about concepts like self-sovereignty, and it's just too far. It's over their head. They don't think that it's for them, or they dismiss it, or they don't understand it because it's just like trying to boil the ocean here. But you realize how important this is, and you just got to shake them. Like, it's like these things matter. Like, we're at a tipping point in society potentially where things could get better or worse, and it really depends on what we do next with the tools we have available to us, these advanced technologies like blockchain, with these tools available to us. And if we don't even have the conversation long enough to talk about the real world use cases of it, we're definitely not going to implement them, and we're definitely not going to make those changes. And how many years from now will it take for us to keep doing more of the same thing before this opportunity is gone? Like, we just keep doing the same thing where it's a handful of people around a room, having intellectual discussions about what could or couldn't be done, but yet at the same time, it doesn't really make ripples through every corner of our political system. It doesn't make ripples through every corner of our communities. At some point in time, like, how many years is it going to be before we lost our opportunity? We lost our shot.
Yeah, that's really valid. And I mean, that's one of the problems with every major movement throughout history is trying to survive and overcome the oppression. The biggest thing to me involving decentralization, blockchain technology, and its ability to facilitate decentralization is the possibility to break the cycle of oppression, revolution, oppression, revolution, oppression, revolution that comes with hierarchical centralized power.
I would make a counter argument to that it's not so much oppression, revolution. I mean, yes, it is, but it's human beings, by and large, I believe, are generally good. Not everyone is good.
Sure.
There are clearly people looking to manipulate systems for their own self-interest. But by and large, people are trying to do their best. And the only way that they've been able to do that is they go, okay, I don't like the way things are working. Let's start a war or some kind of civil discourse and topple the existing system to put in a new system. Well, that new system needs leadership. Well, this was my idea, so I should be in that leadership system.
And we're back to where we were.
And then what happens is the problem is these systems. The problem is humanity has grown so large, over 8 billion people, right? And so it's grown so large that in order to manage human beings effectively with millions of pages worth of legal documents for how we can interact with each other, and many of them necessary, like with contract laws in specific situations and instances, like you have these complex systems and human beings are just doing their best job to try to create something that works for a community that somehow supports 8 billion people with different needs, views, beliefs, ages, backgrounds, etc. And because we're human beings, we're inherently flawed. We have a limited capacity to understand, and because we only live so long before we die, to implement. We just do the best we can with these systems, and then undoubtedly at some point in time they're going to fail, and it's going to be more of the same, and it becomes these ideologies that and they cycle through because people overcorrect and they see things go too far right, they go left, they go too far left, they go far right. And it's just because it oscillates because people are looking at the opposite as the solution to the current existence that they're at. And all of this to bring up is to say the underlying problem in my mind is that the amount of energy, time capacity that a human being has to put into in order to help contribute to, i.e. voting or working for or investing in a economic, societal, political, system is far greater than they have the capacity for, or I guess let's just say, and they aren't introduced it in a way where they desire to engage with it. Sure. So there's no benefit for them. So what benefit is there to engage in a system where you feel like you have no impact, you don't quite understand it, it's super boring, the conversations are not relevant to you? Well, you're not going to. And then what happens is less and less and less and less and less people make these larger and larger and larger and larger and larger systems and decisions, and it's naturally going to aggregate wealth because, naturally it's like an analogy that I'd like to bring up is that think of it like talk about game theory. So imagine that life is like a game in that some people don't know the rules of the game. They're clearly going to be the least likely to win the game. They don't even know the rules.
Right.
the rules are so complicated they can't even engage with them at any point in time that's like where they might have the opportunity to learn the rules. It's so far beyond their scope or desire or whatever. It just seems like, for that matter, it seems like they're not even included in the room whenever those discussions are happening. There are people who know the rules of the game. Those people are going to out-succeed the people who don't know the rules exponentially. And then there are the people who make the rules for the game. Now, it doesn't make you inherently evil if you also make the rules for the game to kind of be like, well, I think that if I'm making the rules and the world is constantly changing and we're adapting to new circumstances, that I'm going to make these rules in this kind of way because I think that's the path to go. And of course, who do I think should best implement that? Well, it's going to be my friend who owns this chemical manufacturing company because I know he's been able to deploy $842 billion successfully in the past. If I'm going to send it anywhere, it's because of that. And of course, it's great. We play golf together. We hang out on the yacht. And
this all sounds familiar, and it can be rationalized away if you're not super curious by saying, well, these are just me going with who I know and what I trust. And that's the easy trap that even good people can fall into when given that kind of power over others.
Exactly. And granted, there are some people there like, look, I'm going to funnel this through because I get my cut or whatever.
Right.
And of course they exist, but they're going to exist no matter what system you create. What happens is the barrier for the risk for reward ratio has to get very high, where it's like very difficult for them to do something like that for that level of corruption, and the reward has to get very low for us to basically minimize that type of opportunity, that type of person. But I don't see that going away anytime soon. All of this is to say, though, is that the barrier is the average person being in this discussion, because you and I can have this conversation all day, every day, but it's not until this gets edified in some kind of way where people interact with it and act upon it that it even becomes meaningful.
True. Absolutely true. And that's, I think, one of the more interesting aspects of like decentralized law conceptually is like, if you look at like what law and economics are, like whether you go from like overarching global scales down to like the most like specific microeconomic model you can find. What we have is societal contracts, like societal agreements that nobody understands fully. Even the people that are paid the special, so we all as a species are agreeing to, we don't know what, but we will kill each other over it every day. And that's a fundamental problem. So one of the fundamental like appealing statements that I've found with people is just the ability to attempt to start again from a blank slate without disruption. And I think that's what we're really seeing with like this particular type of technology, is the ability to test and model and experiment without destroying lives.
That was one of the things I talked about pretty often in my podcast, and this is a shame that we're not seeing this as often now, because whenever the line went down, the people that were interested in the space dipped out, but DAOs were really experimenting with that for a while. You'd had thousands of DAOs that were all experimenting with different forms of governance, different forms of economic models. Granted, they realized that fully decentralized isn't, you need to have more structure, or otherwise, people can't work towards a common shared goal if you don't have a clear mechanism for people to understand how they can contribute and what they get rewarded with when they contribute and when. But that said, that was the first time in history where you had thousands of different types of models competing without a war.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't just spin up a government before and just like without some kind of firearm or.
I learned more from failed projects, from reading white papers for stuff that just didn't work out, but they had like one just stroke of brilliance conceptually in there. Like, you're absolutely right. Yeah. The ability to test and 100%, like 1,000 different concepts, macroeconomic models. And that's one of the most valuable things we got out of this last push, I think, is just an insane amount of people that for the first time were really putting their big brains to like concepts like economics and governance structures and how they correlate.
And it was a shame to me that more money didn't get pushed behind testing those models out. But the problem is the kind of capital that need to get behind it, so that way you can actually have people contribute, because people can't afford, even in the DAO space, people can't afford to contribute time without getting compensated unless they're financially so well off that they can contribute time without getting compensated, which means that it became this more of an esoteric conversation among the other intellectuals who are financially well enough off to be able to do these things. And the people who come into these DAOs, because from firsthand experience, having hundreds of thousands of people coming into different DAOs, and like they try to contribute, and they might even, first off, they don't know where, and they don't have a clear structure or hierarchy for how to interact and do so. But once they do, there's no way to sustainably continue to do that without struggling to survive in other places. And there's a sacrifice to be made. Like it's like like alchemy, it's the law of equivalent exchange. Like if they're giving that time towards that cause without compensation, they're doing it at the expense of being able to do it somewhere else where they could be compensated. And that's not a self-sustaining model. Right? But if there was a way, whenever this next push happens, to reintroduce with larger amounts of capital to test out real economic models and governance systems, I think that would be a fantastic human experiment. Now, to that point, we'll see if the DAO dream gets reinvigorated, and I hope it does. And it very well might, and there are still a number of DAOs that are plugging along and punching through.
Working diligently to try to figure it out myself.
Yeah. So it's not to say that that DAO dream is dead, but it's definitely not as electric as it was, just a couple of years ago.
We learned it's a lot harder than we thought it was.
Oh yeah.
Like infinitely harder than we thought it was.
Yeah.
I can understand like the classical, the Keynesian, the Austrian economic models. I can wax eloquent about DAOs, DAX, DAGs, but like doesn't mean I can just like mix up the sauce and make it go. I'm not going to be able to spin up a never falls over top just casually.
Yeah.
Like there's so much more to it. We've always failed in the past, and I mean there've been some interesting examples. Like you can see like what they did with BitNation and Pangea with Tony Lane Casserly's project, the late Tony Lane Casserly. And there have been a few attempts to create decentralized governance structures over the years. And human nature is very difficult when it comes to game theory and not having a strong man like punishment type of philosophy attached to it. So creating a purely productive economic model is remarkably difficult.
For sure. And I don't know that you necessarily need strong forms of punishment as much as you do. I mean, possibly. But
I don't believe in it. I just see it throughout his history. Yeah. It's currently what we're leaning on.
Yeah. So like in that way, it's historically speaking, yes, we do. Theoretically speaking, to reframe the statement I was about to make, is I suspect that if we can just make the effort required to do something that is not beneficial to the system or the people inside the system, the effort to do so is so great and the reward is so little, then it's going to de-incentivize someone from doing that. And then if you create incentive towards positive functions, then it's more likely you're going to get that kind of outcome. Like anything, you still get these weird anomalies where it's just completely off the charts and you wouldn't have guessed it. But I would hope that blockchain systems, because of the way that they're structured in a more the systems compete with each other to verify that the security, the legitimacy of the action, we can bake into it the incentive without having to create so much punishment. Now, that's theoretical. You still need contract law. And that's the other tricky part of all this, is that without government enforcement, if there isn't the ability to put somebody in prison for stealing $25 million or whatever, then you don't have the safety that you would have in a non-Web3 ecosystem. And so we have to recognize, as much as we want to be completely decentralized, we can't be, because all of society is hinged on contract law. Like since Hammurabi's code,
Sure.
Like the entire, like if I know that the only reason I can work for you for 3 years, let's say if you're building a house, and this is a good analogy, you put in $400,000 worth of time and parts into a house. The only way that I can do that is if I know you're going to pay me the $400,000. And if you don't, the consequences for you are so much more severe than the $400,000 you stole from me, that I have and that whoever's going to enforce that is so great a power that I don't have to be concerned that I'm risking everything in order to provide you a good or a service.
Sure.
So in that way, that was the other thing I think we missed in the last DAO cycle, is that we have to integrate with, obviously minimally if possible, but because we don't need every single law in every single place, because that obviously becomes this convoluted, complicated, cumbersome system like what we have now, where there's 100,000 laws for every jurisdiction that are largely irrelevant and haven't applied since 1792.
It's mostly all Tweedism at this point. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
They can do all the electing as long as I get to do the nominating, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so in that way, it's, I think that the next cycle too is that DAOs and DACs and so on and so forth, the need to understand that this governance systems and economic systems have to integrate with real world nation states in some contractual way,
Sure.
or otherwise they don't provide a safe system for the people, others to contribute inside of those communities. But point being with all of this is the major problem we're trying to solve, because we saw it come up over and over and over again, is that all of these things require deep conversations. It requires deep conversations with senators and House reps and lawyers and people that are change makers that are have impact funds that they're putting towards to use for charities or for infrastructure projects or whatever it is, for people who are trying to solve real world problems in the space, for people who just don't know where to put their money or their time or even the topics of conversation that they have. We all know that the world is scary at times, but we all believe, or many of us believe, that there's some hope and chance to do something about it, but we don't have a clear picture on what that is, generally speaking, as a group, and nothing's really changed to do that. And so because of that, we've done this feedback. We're at the point right now where people dipped out because the line didn't go up, because they didn't understand at a meaningful level that any of this really actually mattered. They just saw Dogecoin went up in value, and here they were, Doge is cool, buy a shirt. They didn't, oh, Dow is the next big thing or whatever, but they weren't trying to experiment with governance solutions in a complicated world where our existing governance models are being outgrown by our population and economic complexity. They didn't fully understand that was what they were contributing to. If they did, perhaps they'd still be around, and for that matter, perhaps the capital necessary to attract them and keep them would still be around. So if that's the underlying problem, which I believe that it is that this conversation has to go from 100 people to 100,000 people to 1 million people to 100 million people to 8 billion people.
Right.
Obviously, the babies aren't going to be involved. It'd be fun to talk to them about it, but to however many billion people.
Right.
And so the question is, well, how do you do that? And that's what we're trying to solve. So all of it to come full circle is that, like, no matter what we come up with here in the Web3 space and the DeSci space, decentralization space, DeFi, DeSci.
Pick your term.
Yeah, pick your
so
term.
many terms at this point. With all the innovation going on, that's half the battle, is just making sure that you're able to communicate with each other now.
Right. Yeah. And you got to signal, like, hey, look, I'm saying the buzzwords. But anyway, so the point being is, like, no matter what we're trying to do in this space, if we can't reach out to the general public, it's gonna fall apart.
Yeah. No, 100%. That's the point to it all, is individual rights and the ability to have more. The two things that I have found to be the most universally agreeable sentences, and like I fancy myself a bit of a social engineer, so like a lot of the work I do is to try to figure out like psychological keys towards adoption and like how people perceive reality. So like I look for like universally agreeable statements, and the two I've found so far that I have yet to be refuted are A, the world could be a better place, and B, I don't feel properly represented. And those two statements seem to transcend almost everything.
There's a couple hundred people that I think would feel very properly represented.
Sure. But out of 8 billion, I'm calling this a win.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm well within parameters to say those are the most universally acceptable. But that's kind of the fundamental like philosophy behind not just like blockchain decentralization, but most movements throughout history. It's just like this is the first time where we've globalized in so many ways. Like, so throughout history, globalization has always been a bit of a nightmare concept. Like the concept of centralized authority, like totalitarianism, things like that. But like global decentralization ends war and self-sovereignty. Like it's fascinating how we have globalized already in almost every way except some of the more like fundamental ways society, like legally. Like the nation state is approaching irrelevancy. And we have the technology to like redefine self-sovereignty. Those aren't my words. Those have been repeated by other people before me many, many times. Like it's just how do we communicate? Bring it all back to what you're saying. How do we engage on that fundamental level? So like the concept of like brick and mortar establishments tied to cryptocurrency, like what you guys are doing here is pretty remarkable as far as like
Thank you.
the fundamentals, you know, and St. Louis even like being like right in the heart of the US where it is definitely an interesting place to find like a little pocket, like a bastion of people still in the middle of crypto winter, like working towards this. And I'm personally really excited to like get to work with you guys more and like watch the community develop over time. Like,
Likewise here, much appreciated.
yeah, absolutely. This has been really fun. I think we can take a break for a minute if you want. I'm gonna use the restroom. Maybe we can revisit another conversation here in a bit. The first one, we're kind of playing it by ear tonight, so
Perhaps.
cool. Okay. Well, we will be back in a little bit, guys. Wait until he started to sit up to make it as awkward as possible.
Oh.
Taking a break?
There's people chatting here and stuff.
Hey guys, just to be real quick, I'm going to take about a 15-minute pause here, and then we'll be back and we'll continue our conversation.
It's
Okay.
It's not muted
Jonas has
anymore.
been busy.
No.
This looks good.
Huh?
Jonas has been busy. This looks good.
See, it's wet. We don't ask for anything from them.
Well, welcome back. We'll be joined here in just a moment by our guest again. In the meantime, please enjoy me sitting here and talking to the audience.
Woohoo!
Yeah. This has been really fun so far, though. I have to say, the first Crypto Monday St. Louis has been definitely an event, I got to say. Oh, yeah. No, I'm excited. 55th chapter. Definitely. It's a big deal.
55.
Yeah. All over the world.
55.
Mm-hmm.
So is it, I mean,
We're off Highway 70, so.
are you officially like every week now? Or
Every Monday.
Oh, yeah. Every Monday we're going to be doing this.
Every Monday.
Hey,
It's all
don't
right.
have to make every one of them, as long as you make a few, right?
He's got a longer drive than you though. Swansea. Right?
Yeah, Swansea. Swansea.
Swansea, Massachusetts.
Yep. Ah. Okay. I think we are live and ready to go, are we not?
I think so.
Okay.
Got a word?
Hey, is that okay if you speak tonight?
Thanks. Yeah, it's fine.
What did you tell him today?
Okay.
What do you say? Go ask for permission.
Ask forgiveness, not permission. Is that it? Yeah.
Sorry.
The future will be decentralized.
Sorry, Cory's underutilized.
Could be USB-C charger.
And so would you plug it into
That right there.
Am I live right now?
Yeah, let's rock.
All right, let's go. Stalling achieved.
Stall achieved. Maximum level.
Right. All right, so second half, in the future, we'll be trying to do like an audience Q&A thing, but I think this week it'd be really fun to just kind of sit here and get into it a little bit about some hot button topics in the industry, have a little bit of general conversation, a little more high level, give a little time that might appeal to other people that are watching that are already feeling familiar. So, well, it sounds like a good subject to you tonight.
I mean, we could definitely talk about regulation.
Oh my God. What do you want to talk about regulation? The SEC, Ethereum, securities.
Yeah, I guess the first question is should crypto be regulated? What's your take? Yes
I
or
mean, yeah, like not by the people I think that are doing it, but I think any larger society needs regulatory agencies to some degree or another. The issue isn't with whether or not we need regulation. The issue is how that regulation is like dictated, like what governance systems we use and who's in control of what and how we mitigate like personal game theories to fight corruption. Like that's the biggest thing about I think trustware conceptually is that we can use advancements in artificial intelligence moving forward to try to help promote trustware and maybe fix some of those things.
Yeah. So do you think our politicians should be the one leading the charge?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I don't believe in a representational democracy, which is a bit of a statement, I know. But so nobody will represent you as well as you'll represent yourself. The issue is that's difficult, and most systems are, designed to not allow you self-representation. It's about power. And that's the big problem when it comes to like politicians is that their personal game theory dictates they act in their own interests, regardless of what that is over yours. So representational systems exist out of necessity, but don't provide good representation. And that applies to regulatory bodies to a certain degree, but it's also strangely the converse of that. So as far as like regulatory bodies, we have to look really strongly at who they are, what their motivations are, and what level of transparency can be attained to be able to have them function correctly. I don't think that any politician succeeds at that.
So that was going to be my next question, is if you felt like there was any particular group that succeeded in that.
I don't think they can by definition of human interest. People will serve themselves. And when you find something like a representative politician, and then you throw every other aspect of society into that person being a linchpin / focal point for such important aspects of representational like interests, you lose true identity because you're not being represented by that person in any way that could directly mirror your personal interests. You're trading efficiency for sovereignty. And in that, you create a system where you've given over your freedoms to an organization, institution, or individual who has their own set of personal interests and game theories under the good faith that they will represent you accurately as a part of their job. But we can't guarantee that. That's not something that we can codify, human interest like that.
So I would agree that you can't guarantee it. And no point in time, I think, has any good politician, to make such a statement, as any good politician, I think, communicated as such. But how do you reconcile political systems where you have information asymmetry? That is, a politician who has access to more resources, understanding up-to-date information, as opposed to the common voter, the average constituent in a particular area. Like, how do you reconcile the differences? Like, how can you self-govern if you don't understand the topics by which are governing you?
Valid point. Yeah, no. So self-governance involves like self-choice as well. And there's going to have to be a limited amount of, I think, optional representation that can be done. So what I'm creating with Geo is technically a pluralistic liquid democracy. So what I envision is the most logical system to maintain self-governance involves, a bottom-up approach that, when tied to the individual's self-interests, can be dictated better because the problem is attached to the genesis of the need.
Do you believe that people understand their needs?
To a certain degree, but I don't believe that the people representing them fully do. So like one possible example of being able to create a pluralistic liquid democracy as a solution to like the information overload required to like properly represent yourself in a complex system, like what we were talking about earlier about societal contracts nobody understands, right?
Yeah.
The ability to have somebody represent you can be modified from what we have currently with elected representatives to where you can do something similar to like what you see with the Cardano system with a proof of stake system, where you can have representatives that can speak on behalf of you. Like if I don't know crap about medicine, but I know this one person is very well educated and will serve me in that one area, I can choose to have them vote for me in that area. But in certain other areas, I can maintain the default of representing myself. So it's kind of switching where the default is, whether it's the default someone else represents you, and you can then choose to engage in the system as an individual, where the system is represented by the individual interest. And then, does that make sense?
It does. So on an individual level, though, that makes sense to me as an individual, that I would want to delegate the responsibility of certain decision-making to people that I perceive as being able to appropriately take on that responsibility.
Sure.
However, as a society, the question I think should be begged is, if as they as individuals get to make decisions about where they are superseding the rights of someone who's probably a more senior expert in a particular topic, and in doing so that affects me negatively, at what point in time are my rights infringed because somebody else is acting as an individual on meaningful policymaking on something that they have no place or space making any impact or contribution towards?
Well, we need to redefine how we look at representation and the general like concept of power between like a consensual and an imposed power dynamic when it comes to representation legally. So Like in a more decentralized structure, you would be able to plug into extant systems. Like what I'm trying to build out with Geo is sort of a base layer Bill of Rights that can then be modified based off of human interest so that we can create a bespoke system of law. So you can sort of specify beliefs as a new DAO structure, if you will. So we'll say conceptually in this theoretical world of self-representation, you have a base global Bill of Rights that everybody can agree is acceptable. Yeah. At least a super majority of people will say, okay? And that itself can be modified by voting. Then that bill can also be further modified to create another layer to specify additional information you can add to it. And then all the people that believe in that can choose to join that particular subsection of the bill, okay? So like it's a modification of a living document. And you can take that and make different modifications to create different organizations of belief. And you can layer that all the way down as far as you can possibly desire to go through a system of checks. And theoretically, you would be able to plug yourself in by choice and choose to interact in the things that you feel you're knowledgeable about. But the things you're not, you could farm out to other people. And the choice wouldn't really be as much as like voting to pass things, as much as which extant structure of belief you want to belong to. And the concept of organizing everything by terrestrial domain, as we see with the nation state models currently, will be out the window for most things, because we'll be able to handle overarching societal concepts like communication, healthcare, etc., on a bespoke basis based off of decentralized on-chain identities attached to like your codified belief in law. We actually functioned this way for quite a while in ancient history before we started really building like the city-states out. And even then for a few years after that, it was very common to have a codified version of law that wasn't attached to where you physically were, but to your physical like origin.
Now, while I find the concept interesting and think that there's definitely elements of it that I think seem on the surface more practical, I do have a large question, which is, what are the universal principles between different groups whenever it comes towards the rules for engagement, both relationally, economically, contractually, like if you have a bespoke system for governance, law, economics, whatever, some variation thereof, or any of those individually, how does one group interact with another group without having the same core belief structure and an economic model, value medium of exchange, contracts for binding the way that they set terms for responsibilities, etc. And if so, and if the answer to that is to say that there is a larger universal principle, which would make sense, then how does that become any different from the nation state?
Well, it looks towards representation and where that power is stemming from. So, for example, if you're looking into these structures and you're trying to build something based off of need and representation, you have to look at who's making those decisions on what's finally said. Like earlier, I made a joke about Tweedism. The old gag from Tammany Hall being, like I said, they can do all the electing as long as I get to do the nominating. Being that ultimately, as long as you can control the parameters of the choice, you control the choice.
Yeah.
And that's the power that we're ultimately resting collectively with the battle between centralization and decentralization is that. And within that lies the fundamental aspect that needs to be mitigated to try to help realize a society where we can interact with each other. So like to prevent conflict in common societal areas. Like the best analogy is, let's say, healthcare. Like healthcare in the United States is a good example of a sort of societal system that we all use, but we have very different opinions on when it comes to the non-physical reality involving healthcare, right? So we can mitigate different religious, cultural, political beliefs when it comes to personal choice in these things through choosing which system of law we want to be represented by, and then overlaying an economic model. Like, so because as you know, with law, in DAO structures, there's always going to be a tokenomics aspect. So like you look at like motivators involving microeconomies, and you look at like things like, well, how do we codify business law now? How do we get into like regulatory bodies for things? Because that's the real, I think, fundamental thing that we need to be looking at is like, how do we prevent people from hurting other people? And what tools do we use to do that to each other outside of warfare? And then how do we overlay incentive models and game theory to try to mitigate that? So like with law and decentralized law, you can look at concepts of, well, we have a base layer of human rights. Okay, so like there can be decentralized hierarchical structures, right?
What do you think would be included in that base layer of human rights?
That's the trick. Like, so for GEO, what we're starting with is the first 10 amendments from the United Nations Bill of Human Rights. And we've slightly modified those to remove the nation state specific language. And I believe that that is basic enough to start. And then, for example, over time, if we were to try to create a decentralized system of law through a DAO structure, this would be like the base layer 1. And then there would be a certain like saturation point where like this can't be modified at all until X amount of people are involved to prevent like super majorities taking over. Because the core concept that makes decentralized law work is that no minority is a majority alone. So that if you can create a global system and weigh it correctly and keep it vague enough and tie it all to basic concepts of rights and to be inclusive as opposed to exclusive with your reasoning, then you can build that out successfully without having to worry about corruption.
While I think
that might have been a little convoluted for what I was
I think where I end up getting trapped in the logic circle is that for a system like that to succeed, it seems to be, and I'd be open, I'm looking for pushback on this, that there's a certain level of inherent morality that is universally shared. Otherwise, because of the aggregation of community power, you could have 50,000, 100,000, 50 million, 100 million people that agree that a shared value such as a common one is that, you know, for Muslims, it's like if you are a Muslim and then you denounce your faith, death is the penalty.
Sure. Okay. So you're asking about like how do we like
a billion
maintain...
people,
right? Okay. So like the way that we prevent. So the layer 1, the concept of the Bill of Rights. Okay, like you can't just modify it to say like except like these people. Okay. Because it's all tied together through bridging. So just like with a chain, like everything has to be checked and verified. Okay. So what we have to do is incentivize through game theory a way to make sure that like any possible modification to the bill can be vetted, to make sure that it doesn't contradict the prior layer of the bill.
but vetted by whom?
Exactly. And this has been the thing that we've struggled with forever, because then we're just back into the government cycle of who does that. Well, there's new advancements in artificial intelligence that I'm fascinated by. And I feel like that's going to be the key foundation to building what I refer to as AI DAO structures, artificially intelligent, decentralized, autonomous organizations, which are going to be DAO structures heavily managed by code and active inference intelligence that can look at and help facilitate and assist in ascertaining whether or not something fundamentally violates the intent of the superseding layer of the bill.
Well,
now, that's one way. We can also do this with humans and keep it fully transparent on chain. And we can game theory in modifiers to things like motivate, like, well, hey, verify this like a typical proof of stake. Like, does this violate, in your opinion, the intent of this bill? And we can try to mitigate like saturation points like that. But there has to be a layering of approval to modify the bill that can be recognized under a global agreed societal contract.
Between the two, I would feel much more comfortable with people, interestingly enough, because what happens with AI is they're trained by a pool of data.
Sure.
And so that pool of data, just kind of like if you control the delegates, you control the outcomes. By controlling the data, by controlling the models. You control what the AI will believe to be right or wrong or to fit
Right.
in or not.
There has to be test data to train it and raise it and educate it.
Yeah, and then alternatively, if it creates its own perspective outside of its trained data set, then at that point in time, we've relegated decision-making entirely away from human beings.
Yeah.
And which I think, while there are some benefits to do so, I think I personally, out of the two utopian, dystopian potential sets, I think that at least in the short term, the higher likelihood would be dystopian. At least,
I mean, I'm inclined to agree with you about that. I just see it as the most logical reality.
Oh,
to
I-
facilitate it.
I think it could definitely set triggers for the human beings. I think, to me, out of all of this, my personal belief is that centralization isn't bad. Bad centralization is bad. So whenever you have leaders that are not transparent, like for instance, like if you add in transparency to leadership, that solves a lot of problems. If you have incentive structures that are misaligned, that creates problems in and of itself. So by setting by having the conversations about what kind of outcomes we want to see, how we're going to draw out those incentives and building those into a code base, and then having it be obvious whenever it does or doesn't get met, that solves another poor centralization execution problem. So this is all reinforcing, by the way, kind of what you're working on, but with just a different kind of, I guess, core thesis, if you might. So in that way, I would like to believe that we don't want to replace humans, that we want to create systems that make it very hard for humans to be bad actors, that make it very easy for humans to be good actors, reinforce good people to want to be in those types of positions, as opposed to reinforce bad people to want to be in those positions, and uplift and give true power to those who should be in power, and also those who give power to those who need to be empowered. And so if you design systems in that way, centralization isn't bad, because you do need to delegate your decision making.
Yeah, that's always been the trade-off, is we're trading off power or personal sovereignty for efficiency. Is centralized systems are efficient. Decision making from one is always easier than from many.
Well, yeah, it's for that matter, I would make the argument that not only is it easier, it's impossible for an individual to even be a subject. It's impossible for any one person, no matter how intelligent or how much time that they have or financial resources to be able to focus on it, to make all the decisions that are relevant to them. And the reason being is because, like, something as simple as like whether or not an infrastructure project makes sense determines on the kind of contracts that are in place for the infrastructure project to take over the land that's in place. And you need to understand, okay, that there's 24 farmers that don't want to give up their land. Well, are they in the right or are they in the wrong? Maybe
Right.
3 of them are, but 21 of them aren't. What's the legal precedent? What's their backstory in all this? What's the repercussion? Like, so just one simple thing about whether or not to put in a bridge or a toll road, like, would take
How do we
lifetime.
mitigate a lose-lose situation where somebody has to lose out, whether it's progress or the individual or whatever, where there's not a win-win? How do we decide that without an individual?
Yeah, and that's even just one particular topic, just off the cuff, like something like whether or not a particular spending bill should be voted in or voted out could have thousands of pages worth of supporting arguments for one direction or the other. And you have no capacity as an individual to truly understand these things, even if intellectually, which most people aren't, you are able to. And I'd make the argument that most people don't have the capacity or the desire or the computing power necessary to process that kind of decision. Nevertheless, the memory, the time and the storage to be able to do it simultaneous to other decisions like that. So I say all this to say is that I am a fan of good centralization, not full decentralization. And that means that the things that can't work centralized, you decentralize. The things that could work better centralized with better systems and more transparency, security, clarity, simplicity, so on and so forth, those things I think should lean towards centralization for the sake of, one, it's more likely that it's, instead of changing 4 million things, you change 4. So it's more likely that you're going to be able to succeed in the mission. 2, it's less likely that you're going to have to be destructive in nature in order to implement this new system. Because in order to topple an entire governance model, you have to, well, it doesn't usually go quietly.
Throughout human history, it's always been a belief. Like that's really the thing is, and I think that's the thing that I think you and I really kind of perceive that a lot of people don't, is that we are very much on the dawn of a new epoch in human history. Like regardless of our efforts, like technology exists.
Yeah.
Like we're just ahead of it enough to perceive it, and we're struggling with, well, how's that going to play out?
Yeah.
But the concepts are there. Like it's inevitable. It's just what it's going to look like. And that's I think, to bring it all back to the beginning of our first conversation, where like we have to look at how we choose to really build the base of everything philosophically, and that comes to like community engagement, like individual rights, self-sovereignty, but also the ability of like a complex society to exist. The understanding that human nature is not to be self-sacrificing. Like I feel like a lot of like the societal framework goes against the individual's desires on a fundamental mechanical level involving the way that the brain was developed, or in short, we can't naturally select our way out of 1 million years in a couple thousand when it comes to like just game theory and personal development. Like, and that's part of the greater dialogue I think we've been struggling with this whole time. And it's definitely not something that you or I are going to solve at a micro council. No individual will solve this. Like we want to. I've seen 1 million people want to.
Right.
But it's going to be all those 1 million people collectively over time.
Well, and I think to that extent, because of the rate of change, my belief is that we don't need 1 million people trying to solve this. We need 1 billion. We
Sure.
need to, by a factor of 1,000, increase the people that are having this conversation to whatever capacity that they can.
Mm-hmm.
And they might pick a very specific thing, like why decentralized, why distributed patent ownership is such an important feature to a well-running society, because they go, well, if you can have 4,000 contributors to a patent, that allows you to have iterative patents. So you think of something like the healthcare system, where drug patent monopolies will create barriers and bridges to create exorbitantly high prices because they have to, because of the way that they have to go to trials, and the expense to put a drug to market. And once you have something that it falls off the patent cliff, you have to create a completely new drug that can be patentable in order to defend it. And so therefore, even if another drug is working, you have to create something. Like, so they might pick a very specific thing, not to go off the tangent.
No, but I mean, that's valid. That's the customization that this allows. It's brilliant, and possibly our only hope to mass adoption is.
And precisely. And so 1 million people, I don't even know if 1 million people are having this discussion.
No,
I would
not
like
at
to
all.
believe-
There's maybe 10,000 people in the world doing anything in the space.
Yeah,
like really doing anything right now.
And to me, that's concerning, because
Yeah.
with the rate of change, I wonder how long our window of opportunity is.
Oh yeah, no, we're definitely losing the window. Like we're 5-10 years away from hopelessness. So like if we don't significantly start fighting a little bit more, like institutions and organizations are going to destroy us, because again, game theory dictates if you're at the top, your job is predominantly making sure that nobody else can compete with you.
I do think, by the way, and I think that this is important to mention, is that I don't have an aversion towards big government. I don't have an aversion towards big corporations. I don't have an aversion towards like large community structures of any type when done successfully. And I think that that's the important distinction there, is like big corporations aren't inherently evil. They're just successful, and they've aggregated their success and resources over time. Now, if they use that to lobby for policies that allow them to dump chemicals into a river, then that's evil. Now, if they do that in a way to depress wages or push over, like, all their parts are being assembled in a factory where there's a net outside, so the little kids try to kill themselves and they shove them back in the factory again,
Right.
then obviously that's clearly immoral, evil. so it's the actions of those institutions. The institutions themselves could, in my opinion, of those who are acting in that way, be more easily be forced with the technological systems we have to act in a way that's in accordance to what we want than it is that we could destroy them and break up 1,000 simultaneously morally just organizations that are filling the void for what that one organization was doing. So in that way, it makes me think that as we're building these tools, that we have to give, in my opinion, the larger organizations and groups of people the benefit of the doubt that they very well could be good people and good organizations trying to do the right things, knowing fair and well that sometimes it's not true, because then whenever we implement things as a collective, we're bringing them to them, then it's like, this will help you be more successful, help us be more successful. It solves you wanting to be transparent because, of course, that's what you want, XYZ Corporation, because you want to leverage that as proof of your brand's value. And you also too want to figure out more efficient ways to pay your people more effectively for their contributions, including collective ownership towards larger contributions of patents or whatever it is that they've created. And so you're offering these things as if they want those things because you believe that they should. And then that allows the market to choose the corporations that do really want those and implement those things, because many of them do, and not choose the ones who don't. And we still get the outcomes without having to start a civil war. And it's just a couple clever mechanisms that we've implemented at a corporate structure, Fortune 500 companies. And it gives us the democratization of opportunity, ownership, and power that we're looking for. It gives us the transparency on how these systems are operating that we've been looking for. And it gives the clarity of good versus bad actors, all while simultaneously towing the line of what all of these governments say that they want anyway, which, to just take it at face value, let's say that they actually do, and they're just poorly running these systems. Clearly, once again, I know that it's not the universal that they are, but in that way, I feel like that's perhaps been, through my journey, kind of going throughout the years that I've been in this space, going through all that, I think I've gone from like the full decentralization towards kind of the understanding that it's like implementing the right bits of decentralization in the right places, and then leaning on the fact that some of the institutions we put in place happened because of thousands of years of human beings just doing human being stuff, and that there's only so much optimization that can happen with us still existing, without our AI children, replacing us with themselves.
Sure.
Like, we're only so capable of being so efficient and corruption free and whatever it might be. And the most important thing we can do is kind of take these little bits and lessons and implement them into our big, large, cumbersome organizations to make them more nimble, but more importantly, more empowering to us as a whole.
Well, let me wrap it up on this question then. I think this is probably a really interesting one. Do you feel like, would you say that centralization or decentralization lends more towards corruption globally?
Actually, decentralization. Historically speaking, I'm not saying that I'm against decentralization. Clearly, I wouldn't be here.
I'm here with you. And I'm inclined to agree with you. Is a weird thing, and that does sound like something that I don't think would come out of our mouths normally.
So what happens? So like, think about like after a war, whenever you've got like, think ancient China, Qin dynasty goes down. You've got all these warring families, and what happens is you've got 14 warring families going over what was once, managed by, one, structure. And what happens is it's so hard to have consistency on. You don't have the same type of reputational capital necessary to engage with one another, because it becomes like, if I steal from the person who's the other warring tribe, then there's all the benefits of me for doing it, because we are all seeking out for ourselves in this desperate fight for power. Whereas if there's one system that we're all operating under, we at least have to agree on the rules of the game. And so it makes it a lot harder for because corruption happens whenever in the in-between. And that's so fair. Whenever something goes from here to there, it's in the in-between that things get siphoned off. And the clearer the rules, the harder it is for the in-between to be the gray area where things can just disappear.
It's valid.
And so that's also too, like whenever a country is going into or out of a war, money will flow into and out of the country and then all disappears. Like that's always the story. It's like, where did all the money in Iraq go? It went into
private companies.
Yeah, well, even just
we
like
monetize war. Capitalism ate war. It's amazing. Like in the Art of War, he writes about how it's best to destroy an enemy quickly, but like that's no longer is destruction the ultimate goal. Game theory at this point through like modified capitalism means that perpetual war is economically the correct choice in a lot of like very few countries like the US has done this, Russia's done this, but like we're seeing like a hybridization of capitalism that's monetized warfare. I'm getting off subject, but like it's fascinating to me how like economic models can be modified to adjust game theory towards basically anything if not regulated.
Yeah, well, war has always, since the dawn of time, has been the way that you acquired resources.
Yeah, but there was always limiting powers because war used to cost money. Now it makes money.
It
That's
costs money.
That's the shift.
Well, it costs money for the losers.
I mean, yeah, but that's the point. Is like once your economy is attached to the private sector, where you have 80% of military action being done for profit. Like that's the hack. I'm convinced that's a big part of why like everything that's happened since the end of World War II has happened is because like the U.S. economic model just never stopped being a war model because we figured out it was profitable.
I mean, well, first and foremost, I wouldn't argue that war is profitable, and I also wouldn't argue that a number of people systematize war for their own self-interest and they do it at scale. I think that would be a foolish argument to pose against. Whether or not it is designed as a function of our society in order to prop up our economy and our, the debt attached to the issuance of our dollars, because we have a never-ending and ever-increasing debt.
The dollar is basically pegged to oil under the threat of the U.S. military at this point, right?
Well,
is that a fair statement?
Well, so in the wider thing is that, and I brought all this up to say, is that part of the reason, and I've been as much as anyone, someone who's at times in my life where I've looked at systems and yelled about the corruption and whatever it might be, and pick a government and whatever, so on and so forth. But what I've stepping far enough away from it, speaking for America, is we inherited after World War II the Team America World Police position. It actually was our agreement as part of the world would accept the US dollar as its global reserve currency. And what we would give in exchange, because we were by far the greatest power and we were the only one that hadn't been decimated because of where the war was waged, where the war was staged.
Yeah.
That gave us and our factories were all ramped up. That gave us the unique position to basically police the rest of the world to make world trade possible. Because up until that point, it wasn't. There wasn't a point in human history prior to that where you could safely take a ship, put it 2,000, 3,000 miles, and do that 50 times and not have to have insurance that 1 out of every 2 times somebody's going to board your ship, kill your people, steal your stuff. Like that didn't exist prior to us in World War II taking on that role. And so by doing so, that of course propped up a situation where we had our military bases all over the place. We're constantly patrolling the seas. That put us in that situation to try to control what governments were doing or not doing, to support the rest of the globe. Now, do I think that clearly went off the rails in some ways? Yes, of course, but like all things human beings do, everything goes off the rails whenever you've got unlimited access to power and you feel justified in your influence. But all that is to say is it was an obvious consequence of somebody having to take the position of, and that's a centralized thing. Without having some form of centralization, now granted, if done well, but somebody has to make it safe that whenever you go and you fill a cargo ship full of $849 million worth of goods, that it doesn't get boarded by Somali pirates.
There has to be a rule of law attached to a monopoly on violence.
And it has to be large.
Yeah, it has to be global in scale.
It has to be global in scale. So like it's the whole concept of like, if the United States it weren't the Team America World Police, there's nobody else large enough to do that. I mean, China pales in comparison. They don't have the capacity to patrol all of the seas to facilitate global trade. I mean, at best, maybe the stuff around the South China Sea, maybe with India, you know, all that, you know, the rest of Asia. They're not going to be able to do it for all of Africa, for all of South America, for all of North America, for all of Europe, to ensure that, like, to protect against every possible naval attack or aircraft attack or land or train attack, whatever it might be. They're not going to be able to secure all of the mechanisms for transport of very expensive goods. Only we have the resources to do so. And of course, that comes from our military budget, and it reinforces why we have to have power in all these different geographic regions. And I'm not saying that it's obviously all good, but the question is what would the world do without that vacuum? I mean, and that's some pretty heavy centralization. It really asks a huge question, is like, if all of that went away, is the world a better place? I don't necessarily know that it is. Now, what the alternative is that's a much larger question. And to me, that seems like, okay, if we believe that the world should be a safe place to conduct trade, and you shouldn't be afraid that you'll get kidnapped and sold for ransom everywhere that you go, and as opposed to just a handful of places that you go. But like, you know, right now it's like 4% of the world you travel to, you go, okay, like, get insurance that you might get kidnapped. If we weren't policing everywhere all the time that Americans might want to go or other people might want to be at, then it goes from 4% to 40%, especially if you have any kind of wealth or there's opportunity from stealing what is yours, because the incentive then sways because there isn't a big policing force with the might to be able to control those things.
Yeah, but if you zoom out, that creates more exploitative economic models on the global stage, because you're still just policing with the gun, and that's the authority, the rule of the gun, which is, well, I have this stuff, but I also have this gun, so I'm going to take my stuff through your land, through your sovereignty. I'm going to take some of your stuff while I'm there, and etc. And that's the fundamental issue I think I have, and I don't have a solution. I'm not trying to.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I agree with you there.
Yeah, like I'm not trying to be like, you're wrong because of this thing that should be right, but like I think. That's the big issue philosophically, and we can drill that down to the core of all the different issues, is the aspect of the fundamental nature of humanity and humanity's ability to regulate without external forces.
Humanity has never shown an ability to self-regulate in large-scale groups.
Yeah, and humanity's also never shown an ability to regulate successfully without a severe amount of bloodshed. And that's, I think, the bad and the bad that we're currently trying to mitigate between the two.
Yeah, so in creating these systems, it's thinking about what is practical and reasonable to implement in a time frame where we can actually make a real impact before the tipping point, before that window is closed, as we were talking about. And kind of what's directionally correct. What kind of directionally correct movements can we make? And I believe to try to pick, I know prior to this starting filming, I posed the idea that maybe perhaps I try to pick a topic that it might rile some people up.
Yeah. We were going to be contentious, but we didn't.
Yes. And so in this way, if I might want to pick one to just get people to pause and examine themselves, is as a community, as you mentioned, this small community of us that have actually been in the space for some period of time, going and trying to do our best to enact the possibilities and create real change.
Right.
But as a community, I think we get so stuck on these larger philosophical concepts, which have, historically speaking, have never escaped anything than being philosophical, myself included, for the record. And so that we get so far onto decentralization and down with the US dollar, it's Bitcoin or nothing. It's like, I'm not saying that there isn't strong arguments for all of these things. Clearly, I'm here. But we get so on one side that we're so far away from the ability to enact anything that we don't enact anything. And that's why we're here so many years into this without, granted, there's been forward momentum. We now have payment rails that are blockchain, and people can send thousands of dollars in seconds, and that's cool, but they're getting largely centralized again. The largest systems are, like whenever you think about in this ecosystem that provide the greatest value is Ethereum. That's centralized. You got a small group of people making the decisions about it. You've got Circle, super centralized. You've got Tether, super centralized. And you only recently, like with the ordinals, have anything going on Bitcoin, and you could even argue because of like all the BlackRock ETFs and everything that Bitcoin is getting semi-centralized. So all of it is to say is that like in our desire to collapse the whole system or to solve all these problems all at once, that we've been ineffective at being able to take the little bits that really matter, the transparency of existing leadership, of existing organizations, institutions, the opportunity to decentralize opportunity and specifically ownership, like in real world, tangible, like valuable things, and wealth. And if we don't change where we're at, if we don't learn to move and from the position, the line that many of us have drawn in the sand to try to like implement these things inside of these institutions, we're not going to do anything. And it will look back on all this. It'll sound like a nice Tolstoy novel or whatever, whenever we like listen to all the conversations we've had, but it'll otherwise be largely irrelevant.
Interesting. I can see that. I'm inclined to agree with you on that. I think philosophically, it's definitely at a point where we as a community have spent a large period of time in discussion and not enough in action. Now, I feel there are some communities out there that are doing more than others, but in general, you're absolutely right. If I had to take a stance on that.
Yeah, and the best thing we can do is get more people doing more.
Absolutely. Well, Cory, it's been a pleasure talking to you this evening. The first Crypto Monday St. Louis has been absolutely really enjoyable. I appreciate the space. I look forward to coming in every week, bringing people in. Absolutely wonderful having you here, brother. Thank you very much. And hey, you guys, take it easy. We'll be here every week. We'll figure out a more solid structure coming up, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the future. Yeah.